Welcome to the Stormsurf video surf forecast for the week starting Sunday, August 27th. Looking at significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean, we don't see a whole lot going on, pretty much like last week. But of some interest, there is an area of seas, only 18 feet, but this is part of a gale that existed here previous. Let's dive into the details and see what's going on. So stepping back in time to last Sunday, there was a gale actually off of Chile. It produced, it's not even on the chart here, but a little bit before the Saturday night, a small area of, what was that, about 33-foot seas, pretty much out of the Southern California swell window, but aimed pretty well to the north. So some back angle swell from that is actually hitting Southern California right now. This is expected to continue through the week from a southeasterly direction, probably making it into some of the more exposed spots in Northern California, but that's about it. And then starting Thursday night, another gale developed south of Tahiti, not a very large one, actually pretty small in coverage, produced a small area, 28-foot seas right there and right there. Very small in coverage, you see, but pushing pretty well to the north into Saturday, and that's enough to create another small pulse of swell that'll arrive about a week later. So, small southern hemi swell just about in the water now relative to California, and then another one expected for the Labor Day weekend. But small is the operative word, and not a whole lot expected beyond that. But let's take a look forward. Anyway, go through the usual drill here just to make sure we haven't missed anything. So we start jet stream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help us support the formation of gales. When they do form, help direct their track. Of course, we're looking for a trough, and we don't see it. Right now, we have a zonal flow. That is the northern branch of the jet running about 25 south, east to west. The southern branch down around 65 south. In between, well, this is where you're going to get high pressure development. And also notice, well, you don't see it here, but the ice line is at about 65 south. So the southern branch, that's the influential branch of the jet, is running over Antarctic ice, not over ice-free waters. So even if some sort of a gale were to develop, it wouldn't get any traction on open waters and generate no swell. So we'll just roll through here. You see the jet continues as we get into Tuesday. Displaced well to the south, a little bit of a trough trying to develop way off to the southeast again on Thursday, but no winds to support it. Another push of energy here down around 65 south, sweeping off to the east. There you go. Look at that. That's a little bit of winds, at least 140 knot winds, but there's the ice line, 65 south right there. So no go. Lifting a little bit north next weekend. Probably not enough to do anything, though. We'll just roll this out. And there we are. We're at 180 hours and nothing really happening. It's getting kind of late in the season. We wouldn't be expecting a whole lot from the southern hemi now. Really, it's time to start looking north, but we'll go through the rest of this. Next, we take a look at surface level pressure, surface level winds. Yeah, a little bit of a gale right here at 60 south, but notice the winds all pushing south, so that really doesn't do anything. There's our big high pressure we've been talking about in between the split jet stream flow. We'll just roll this out. We're looking for anything that looks like fetch. There's 35 knot fetch, aimed south and all over Antarctic ice. Yeah, there's your gale right there. Remember, the jet's down here. This is well, pretty much inland over Antarctica, of no interest. And all this is, yeah, just barely clear of the ice. Maybe it's 62 or 63 south, but not doing a lot. Here we go. We get into Saturday. Little bit of fetch, 35, barely 40 knots over ice-free waters, all aimed well off to the east, barely targeting Peru. Certainly not our forecast area. High pressure, there you go, look at that, just pushing everything south, and we're at 180 hours, and just not a whole lot going on here. And then finally, significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean. Not a whole lot going on here either for the next week. The forecast just looks rather placid. We'll roll this out, and you can just see nothing happening of any real interest. So let's take a look north. We normally, about August 15th, that's about the earliest we've seen any reasonable North Pacific swell evolve. We're past that point, so we'll start looking, just see what's going on. We see the jet here kind of looking a little bit better than last week. At least there's some energy more or less on the 45 north latitude line. And by Wednesday, notice this, things are starting to look a little bit more interesting. A trough dipping to the south, that would support, of course, counterclockwise flow aloft. That's the hallmark of low pressure in the northern hemisphere. And down at the surface, so maybe there's some hope for some sort of low to pressure development in this area. And look at this, the trough, it kind of pinched off, but it does push pretty well south into Thursday. And then stronger winds build feeding it. It's kind of a broken up trough, so I don't know if I'd really call it a trough, but something that at least looks like it has some hope for maybe doing something. And then yet another trough trying to organize in the northern Gulf of Alaska. This one actually even looks better. Stronger winds, what is that, 100 and, probably about 170 knots. Feeding that, of course, I wouldn't believe a model 180 hours out, but a little bit of hope. Let's go take a look at the surface charts. Here we are, surface level pressure, surface level winds, and you can see right now, just looking, no real dominant pressure features, a pretty weak pressure pattern, not even enough to generate wind swell along the California coast. No 15-knot winds pushing into the east shores of the Hawaiian Islands, no wind swell there. We'll just roll this out. Now look at this, a little bit of a gale. Monday night forecast for the Gulf, a little tiny fetch, a 35-knot winds aimed southeast. Probably not any swell will result from that, but it is a step in the right direction. Proposed tropical development in the far west Pacific. We'll see what happens with that, and it starts heading off to the north. And then the remnants of that, remember how the jet starts dipping in this area come by the weekend. And look at this, 35-knot winds are forecast for the western Gulf into Saturday, building to 45 knots on Sunday, and holding at 40 knots even into Monday. Hard to believe. Now, the interesting part was on the 6Z run of the model, this is the 18 run. The 6Z run had something also in this area. The 12Z run had absolutely nothing. And now with the 18Z, it just posted, and it's proposing yet a stronger system than the 06Z run. So maybe, just maybe, there's some hope for the fall season getting ready to start. Let's go take a look at the wave height charts. Here we are, significant wave heights. We'll just roll through this. There's a little tiny bit of fetch. What is that? Maybe 16 or 17 foot seas, and it's gone. Then this is the supposed tropical system doing its thing, and all it does basically is track north, but we want to see its remnants start building in the Gulf, and there we go. We're at 06Z on Sunday. What is that, 20 foot seas? And then quickly building to 26 foot, 31 foot seas next Sunday, almost 32 feet. That seems just too good to be true, given how there's absolutely nothing going on in the North Pacific at this moment in time. And all this is supposedly from a tropical system that hasn't even formed yet. So the odds are pretty much non-existent that this will happen. But it's a great tease, looks great, something to chat about. And assuming that that system does not form, then let's go look for potential for wind swell development. As we said, trades pretty weak east of Hawaii, nothing going on in terms of north wind and the usual pressure gradient over California. We'll roll this out. Now we notice, see low pressure there in the Gulf, that's sort of knocking down the normal Gulf high pressure and displacing it south. That'll keep, maybe trades into the Big Island, maybe a little bit on Tuesday, and some 15-knot winds start building along the California coast, but nothing too strong. Now see, look at this fetch here. If that was a little bit further north, you didn't have low pressure up here, you'd have trade wind swell for Hawaii. But as it is, looks like rough, raw, 15-knot, 20-knot winds along the California coast. Maybe good for some 8-second period wind swell sort of thing building into Wednesday. Thursday, 25-knot winds off North California, more wind swell. And notice here's some fetch pushing towards Hawaii, so maybe a little bit of wind swell come Thursday. And then Northern California still. 25-knot winds into Friday. Looks like almost an eddy flow starting to develop. That'd be south winds along the California coast. And then even that starts fading out and things dissipate. But since we're here, let's go take a quick look at the gale supposedly forecast for the Gulf. Doesn't that look just great? Hard to believe. Wonderful tease, though. Like the signs of it. Maybe in a couple more weeks that might be closer to reality. All right, let's take a look longer term, what's going on. Of course, the long-term forecast is always dictated by the Madden-Julian oscillation, that in combination with the El Nino Southern Oscillation Index. Of course, no El Nino going on, La Nina, but let's get into the details there. As usual, we start inspecting winds along the equator. East Pacific here, West Pacific here, 5 degrees north and south of the equator, specifically in the Kelvin wave generation area from 170 west to 135 east, right in here. And this is all from the TAO buoy array. Clearly, east winds in control everywhere, including the Kelvin wave generation area, though a little bit lighter right out here. Anomalies, differences from normal for this time of year. Pretty much a neutral pattern here, but you can see this also maps sea surface temperatures, and you can see temperatures cooler than normal. But out in the Kelvin wave generation area, east anomalies in control. That suggests at a minimum the inactive phase of the MJO. And if those east anomalies persist long enough, it is a sign of La Nina. And that really is the case. It's been like a non-stop inactive phase of the MJO for months now, and that doesn't look like it's getting ready to abate anytime soon. Looking at the forecast, this is 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies that you're looking for the east-west component of the winds. We would love to see westerly anomalies. The Kelvin wave generation area is right between these two tick marks going down. This is past history, July, August. You can see blues right in the heart of the Kelvin wave generation area, and this has been the case for months now. That means east anomalies. That is synonymous with the inactive phase of the MJO. Here's the forecast. Here's where we are right now. Oh, and you can see the scale right there. Okay, Kelvin wave generation area, basically between right in that area. And you can just see east anomalies only forecast to build in the next couple of days, then maybe back off just a little bit. But all this smells very much like La Nina. Looking at the forecast charts, outgoing long wave radiation, that is the yellows and oranges, suggest more sunlight reflectivity off the ocean surface, which typically means high pressure, which means the inactive phase of the MJO. That is what is in control right now. The Kelvin wave generation area, pretty much, there we go, from right in this area here on the equator, and expected to last for another 5 days and then go to a neutral phase per the statistical model. The GEFS model, Ensemble GFS model, suggests, if anything, maybe a very, very weak form of the active phase of the MJO showing up in week 2 of this 2-week forecast, but we're not holding our breath on that. Looking at phase diagram charts, this is another, looking down, assume you're looking down on the North Pole, and the active phase of the MJO moves from west to east from the Indian Ocean over the Maritime Continent, over the West Pacific, under the U.S., over the Atlantic on the equator, and then on top over the north end of Africa, back to the Indian Ocean. The heavy dot is where the active phase is. If you're inside this circle, it's considered exceedingly weak. And so we have a weak active phase of the MJO in the Indian Ocean, forecast over the next 2 weeks to move east per the ECMF model, but also get very weak and be indiscernible. GEFS pretty much says the same thing. Maybe it'll peak out just a little bit in the Western Pacific, but basically the strength of the active phase of the MJO has been extremely weak. In fact, let's take a quick look. So this chart just doesn't show you where the active phase is, it just shows you how strong it is. Back January 2015, during our Super El Nino, major spikes of the active phase of the MJO, very strong indeed. Now we're under a La Nina-like environment. It started actually last fall. Notice how weak the MJO is. Got one little peak here doing pretty good last, it was about February, March. But now look where we are now. Just very weak, non-existent. Just not a lot of fuel in the atmosphere to support storm formation. And looking at the 40-day upper level model, so oranges and yellows suggest dryness, the inactive phase of the MJO. And you can see here New Guinea, Ecuador right there, Peru, equator right there. Dry pattern suggesting the inactive phase of the MJO moving east into probably about the end of September. But this model suggests the active phase of the MJO and a little bit more coherent than what it's looked like past week or two. Developing in the far west Pacific, the first week of September or so, and then migrating across the Pacific into the early part of October. This would be a window for the North Pacific where we might actually see some gales starting to develop. So, somewhere first week of September, perhaps. And then, of course, the CFS model, 850 millibar winds, past history down on the bottom, the forecast up top, the Kelvin wave generation area, right in this area, right here, we see a lot of blues. That suggests the inactive phase of the MJO. Let's overlay the MJO, and there you go. The dotted contours are the inactive phase of the MJO. So sort of a double pulsed inactive phase right now, continuing into the latter part of September. So, and then here's the active phase, not really getting traction till earliest mid-September into later September, early October, and this looks much weaker than what it did a week ago, but this is probably more realistic given where we are with La Nina. Weak westerly anomalies, maybe some support for gale development that time. We would say maybe not until the end of September, according to this model. Then let's overlay the low-pass filter. Now here is this dotted contour right in the Kelvin wave generation area. This is a classic sign of La Nina. And when especially when you see the solid contour is over in the Indian Ocean. If it were over here, then we'd say La Nina. When they're reversed, we'd say El Nino, but when they're reversed like this, then we say La Nina. And if anything, notice the coverage of this footprint only building as we get deeper into fall. But also notice the pattern is shifting off to the east, meaning that this is probably the last year. Well, it is the last year. We're pretty certain of La Nina. And that tends to happen when it moves more off to the east, and then it starts fading the year after that. So that's that. So much for MJO and the atmosphere. Let's go see what's going on in the ocean. Subsurface temperature profile. That also gives us a really good clue what's going on with El Nino or La Nina. West Pacific here, East Pacific here. Looking down the anchor lines of the sensors, on those anchor lines of the TAA buoy array strung the whole way across the Pacific. And as you can see, warm water in the west at the 30 degree centigrade in the far west Pacific. 28 degree isotherm limited to about 167 west. It was making its way, I think it was over around 140 or 145 at one point. And the 24 degree isotherm stretched the whole way into Ecuador. It has backpedaled to the depth of 24 degree temperatures here is getting shallower as well, but not much shallower. So hopefully this is as far retreated as warm water will go. What this ultimately means is cooler water in the East Pacific, and that is a signal of La Nina. Now, also, here's anomalies, differences from normal for this time of year, and you see it's cooler, -1 degree anomalies here in the East Pacific, down 100 meters, 150 meters or so. And whatever warm water there is, which isn't a whole lot, 1 degree anomalies are pretty much isolated to the West Pacific. The dividing line is here at about, 155 or so, 155 west. So this was had warmer temperatures over here even 2 or 3 weeks ago, but is steadily eroding, strongly suggesting some sort of La Nina or a pulse of La Nina in play and building. A different version modeled of this, but basically depicts the same thing. Cooler water developing. This is more stark here. 1, 2, 3 contours. What's that? 2 to 3 degrees below normal in these pockets here. Subsurface, and it definitely looks like this is radiating or pushing off to the east like a cold, not a warm Kelvin wave, a cold Kelvin wave, and there's probably a name for it, but I don't know it. Anyway, so that's more evidence of La Nina developing. This will all erupt at the surface and start building up in here at some point. Upper ocean heat anomalies. All right, so upper 300 meters of the ocean. Last year, September, October, La Nina, blue, cooler waters. no surprise, we knew about that. But then it's rapidly fell apart in like January, and we got this, wouldn't call it a Kelvin wave, but a push of warm water. We got warm water building off of Ecuador here. Another push into May, June, but now look at this. That's all rapidly fading. Cool water building. What is this? 2 contours. So half to 1 degree below normal over an expanding area. Look, it looks to be building east too, suggesting, now comparing that to last year, not as strong. This is in right about the same time frame, not as strong, but not a whole lot weaker, but suggests and last year was a very weak, if even a La Nina, though it was La Nina. And so more of the same looks likely, and not surprising. There's a lot of heat buildup in the ocean. We had 2 years of a super El Nino, so that has to discharge, and La Nina is the natural sort of spring back or swing of the pendulum from being too warm to now being a little bit cooler. Sea level anomalies, so this is, and there is Peru right there, New Guinea there. Here's the equator. You see -5 degree centimeter anomalies, and this area was just in this area last week. It has expanded and built. What this means, strip out all the waves, strip out the tides, strip out the wind chop. You have sort of the ocean's surface is depressed by 5 centimeters. What's that, maybe 2 inches or something, which means cooler water at depth, only supporting what we're seeing in the other charts, cool water pattern building, which is the hallmark of La Nina. Taking a look at surface temperatures at the, in the Nino 3.4 region, which really goes from 120 west out, but what you see, cool water upwelling along the coast of Peru, being caught by the trades, pushing over the Galapagos, and then out into the central Pacific on the equator. Pretty much standard indications here of some sort of weak La Nina conditions. The good news for the moment is the trend. This is the 7-day temperature trend. We actually see temperatures warming. Now, this doesn't mean they're warm here off of Peru, because they were quite cool a week or 2 ago. But the trend is warming here, so that means maybe this pulse of the La Nina, and that's exactly what it does. It pulses, it goes on, and sort of in sync with the MJO, but not exactly. Things warming, this pulse is maybe wrapping itself up. Still cool out this region, but it'll push off this way and dissipate at some point. So the trend is actually looking a little bit better than it has for the past couple of weeks, when we had a strong cooling trend out in this entire region. The backed off view clearly shows cool water from Ecuador over the Galapagos out into the Nino 3.4 region, which is from 170 west to 120 west, right there, 5 degrees north and south of the equator. Not super cool, but cool enough. Let's go look at some details. Here's the temperature trend in the Nino 1.2 region. This is the area right up along Peru and Ecuador and the Galapagos. You can see down a little, well, pretty much neutral for the moment, but it's still down. It's down at not like a half a degree. We're down a whole degree below normal, 1.057 to be specific, and the trend has been down somewhat. We were averaging around a half a degree below normal. Now we're down to almost 1 degree, but this area is noisy. Doesn't really matter. Here's the one that really matters, the Nino 3.4 region, the main area for monitoring El Nino and La Nina. Current temperature down just 0.138 of a degree, but you can clearly see the trend. We were a half a degree above normal up until July, and now we've just been on this steady downslide, and it would not be unexpected to see these temperatures continuing to start falling. Let's see what's going on in the atmosphere above the ocean. Southern Oscillation Index, difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti. Positive numbers suggest the inactive phase of the MJO, and over a long enough period of time suggests La Nina. Current value, right in the middle of nowhere, 1.15, pretty neutral. The 30-day running average, though, positive at 4.62. Weekly suggesting the inactive phase of the MJO. The 90-day running average we use to look for La Nina, El Nino, dead neutral, 0.45. So atmospherically, at the moment, we're not seeing signs of La Nina, though clearly in the ocean and at depth we're seeing it. So it honestly looks like this La Nina, it's building subsurface in the ocean, working its way up to the surface. The atmosphere hasn't figured it out yet. It'll take a couple of months, but as we get into December or so, it should definitely notice the changes that have been happening in the past couple of weeks in the ocean, assuming they continue to occur, which all data suggests it will. Here's the trend, the 30-day SOI trend. Back January 2015, we were in El Nino, Super El Nino. You can actually see the pulses of the MJO in here. Then, boom, big active or inactive phase of the MJO in July 2016 pushed us into what looked to be more like a La Nina pattern. But then notice the trend has been kind of down, and now it's just sort of evening out. It's at 5, the 30-day average, but just looking at the whole thing, the trend looks to be not heading negative, but not really heading positive either, which is maybe a good thing, a weak La Nina at best. The ESPI index, similar to the Southern Oscillation Index, but instead of measuring difference in pressure in these two areas, measures the difference in precipitation. A negative value in the index means drier than normal conditions here, which one would expect if the water temperature was cooler here. Less evaporation, meaning less support for rainfall. Current index, minus 1.17. It had actually gotten that, it was real negative there, almost like -2 for, it was a couple of weeks, a month ago or so. Then earlier last week it was down to -0.6, but now it's going negative again, minus 1.17. Only suggest, and this leads what happens in the atmosphere by typically about 3 months or so. So, and right here, there is your rainfall anomalies. You see, actually it's kind of, just kind of dry right in there, not unexpected with La Nina in play. Sea surface temperature anomaly forecast. Here we go. So here's the hindcast. We were up 0.5 degree above normal April, July or so because of that little warm push off of Peru. But the forecast now, we're right in this area, about 0.2 of a degree below normal. Now the model has actually gone deeper. Last week we were looking at minus 0.7, 3/4 of a degree, minus 0.75, but now it's forecast by January down to be 1 degree below normal. This certainly looks like La Nina, and the rebound was forecast to go up to plus almost 0.5 degree, now just back to neutral come April. So probably a more pronounced view of La Nina in the atmosphere this winter. Remember last winter, lots of precipitation, and we got some surf, but a lot of that was hangover energy from the El Nino, Super El Nino the year before. All that energy is long gone, tapped out. So now a clearer manifestation of La Nina is likely to express itself in the atmosphere this coming fall and winter. And then a real quick look at the PDO, Pacific Decadal Oscillation. It's sort of like a long-running El Nino or La Nina. It runs in anywhere from 15 to 30-year cycles. More a theory than an absolute certainty. But anyway, the thought was in January of 98, we went from the active or the warm phase of the PDO, which is a pattern dominated by like El Nino-like conditions. We had the Super El Nino of 97, 98, and then things went cold. Yeah, we had a bit of you can still have El Ninos during the inactive phase of, or during the cool phase of the PDO, just like we did here in 2002, 2004 kind of time frame. It sort of pushed the PDO index positive, but by and large, the index was negative from 98 into 2014, and then just the same way it went negative, boom, a big El Nino developed, and it looked like the index was moving positive, and it is, and has held positive, but we do have these little downward spikes, and one right now driven by La Nina embedded within what we think is the warm phase of the PDO, but we'll have to wait and see. The index, what's that, peaking out at 2 standard deviations above normal, where this La Nina was down almost 3 standard deviations. So we'll see whether this is just a momentary blip in a long-running cool phase of the PDO, or whether it has in fact changed. We won't know. It'll probably be another year or more. But typically, if you're going to get a blip, it only lasts for about 2 years at the most, maybe 3. So we'll see. Anyway, information to ponder. So to wrap things up, 2 small southern hemi swells working their way in, one from the southeast and one from about 200 degrees relative to California. Also, the second of those 2 swells will actually make some small southern surf for Hawaii, which has been locked out of most of the activity this entire year because all the storms have been in the southeast Pacific and not in the central Pacific. After that, the models are teasing at something going on, driven by a tropical system, going extratropical perhaps in the Gulf of Alaska. Don't believe any of that. Otherwise, we are in the inactive phase of the MJO and probably not any real relief for another couple weeks. Maybe sometime mid to late September is when we might see something that sort of looks like the start of fall. So that's it. We'll do it again next week. Same time, same channel. Thanks for watching.